Who did he identify? I know Aquino's the only one name you've mentioned so far.
That was, when Johnny was here, he did name names, some of which have never been spoken of before to me. Michael Aquino was the big one that he talked about the most. But in terms of the politicians that he mentioned, he has stated the very same ones that Paul Bonacci and many others have named and have been damned for doing it. And do you want me to name the same ones?
I don't know, we'll put it in, but let's put it on Kim.
Okay. Some of the names that have come through other victims as well as my son is the names of...
I wrote a letter to the FBI and I said, election fraud violation. Right? I wrote to the U.S. Attorney first because I knew the FBI would probably ignore me. And she wrote me a nice letter back and said, I'm referring this to the FBI.
How did they know Johnny was going to be alone that morning? And I heard something in court that I'd never heard before, anywhere. Paul Bonacci straightened up in the chair, and he said, well, they made prior arrangements with Johnny's father. How did they know Johnny was going to be alone that morning? And I heard something in court that I'd never heard before, anywhere. Paul Bonacci straightened up in the chair, and he said, well, they made prior arrangements with Johnny's father. I was blown away.
Let's see that.
I about fell off my chair in the courtroom.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yep. And that's important, and that can all go in this section.
Yeah, I have a note on it.
Yeah.
On the father.
Were you surprised when you heard that in court?
I already did.
Huh? You already had heard that?
I have a note. I have a note on that right here. I was going to ask you about that. Why the father? Weren't you suspicious when the father, in 13 years, the only time he never went with Johnny was that morning?
13 months.
13 months. Yeah.
Yeah, I would. Rusty, how did you know that John... Oh, wait a minute.
Being in the circles.
I know. I remember what you told me in DeCamp's office. Do you remember? Because you also said it on a radio program.
No.
And I've got the tape.
You're lucky to have the tape, because he never got me one.
What about Soda?
I've got the tape put away.
We didn't mention Soda's name either.
No, we didn't talk about Soda, but we can.
Yeah.
Rusty, when he was shown a picture of John Gosch with no labels on it or anything in DeCamp's office, remember?
Picked it out.
George pulled out the picture, and he says, do you know this guy? And he held up John Gosch's picture. And Rusty says, yeah, I met him in Larry King's office.
He was at Larry's office.
He's over at Mac, and the Max, and he was also at Larry King's office.
Yeah.
Karen Burns told me that the very first time she ever laid eyes on John Gosch, she suspected him.
Yeah, your husband.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Was he participating in all the parties, too? Did he go to those in Nebraska? Did you ever see one?
That many of the parties. I tried to avoid those like the plague.
But you know, in your circle of talking to people, did you ever hear of him going to those parties? Because, see, he was gone all the time, Rusty. Yeah. He'd leave on Sunday morning. He wouldn't get back till Saturday night. And then he would get his laundry done, pack up, and he'd leave again. He would never tell me where he was staying. I never had a phone number or an itinerary
part of the network
of where to reach him.
Yeah. Have we got new film in there? Is it running?
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Okay, all right.
Hey, that's the best stuff.
Let's go with it. Go.
I figured we got this much time.
Okay. In 1999, John DeCamp called me and asked me if I would come to Omaha, Nebraska. In 1999, John DeCamp called me and asked me if I would come to Lincoln, Nebraska to testify in a federal court hearing for Paul Bonacci. Paul Bonacci was going to file charges against Larry King for his own abuse that he received at the hands of Larry King. It would be one of the first times a victim was able to do this in a federal court. I testified about Johnny's story, what happened, but then the most interesting thing started to develop when Paul testified. The judge asked Paul to relate the entire story about Johnny's kidnapping. Paul told every detail of how Johnny was kidnapped, why, for what purpose, the fact that he was taken to Sioux City, then sold into this ring. The judge then asked Paul, how did the kidnappers know Johnny Gosch would be alone that morning on the paper route? And Paul Benassi sat straight up in the chair. He looked at the judge and he said, prior arrangements were made with Johnny's father to be sure that Johnny would be alone on the route that morning. I was sitting in the courtroom. I had never heard this before in all the years of the investigation, and I about fainted. The other key question that the judge asked Paul Benassi was, why did they pick Johnny? What did they want him for when there's so many runaways to choose from? And Paul Benassi said, Johnny fit the criteria of what they were looking for in a victim, someone to use in this manner. After the judge ruled in favor of Paul Benassi in this federal court ruling by Judge Erbaum, which awarded Paul Benassi damages in the amount of $1 million, the judge also stated in court that he believed that Paul Benassi was telling the truth about his own abuse and that of the kidnapping of my son Johnny. To me, this meant new information and a new focus for the investigation. I traveled back to Des Moines and I made an appointment with the police department and the county attorney. I presented them with the information about the federal court ruling, Paul Benassi's testimony about Johnny's kidnapping, and they looked at me and they said, well, I'm sorry. We simply do not accept Judge Erbaum's ruling. We do not feel Paul Benassi is credible despite what the judge has said. I then went to the new governor of Iowa, Governor Tom Vilsack, who had taken office several months before. I approached him because I know he has the power to force the law enforcement to act. Tom Vilsack, Iowa's governor, stated that neither kidnapping of Johnny or Eugene Martin, the two newspaper boys from Des Moines that are missing, were any of his concerns, and that I should take up my problem with the Department of Public Safety. That's the message that he gave me. He was not concerned. In Iowa, the Department of Public Safety does a lot of things. They place traffic lights at busy street corners. They do lots of other things, but they don't do kidnapped children. But the governor wasn't interested. This is, again, the reaction that I got when the evidence was given to these men. I would ask the question again, is it utter stupidity? Do they not understand how to do an investigation? Is this investigation, these crimes, so far out of their league, they don't know what to do? Are they protecting someone who is high up in our government? Or are they involved themselves? Or is it all four? It's a multiple choice question. Think about it and you choose. What has happened here is a travesty. It's a horrible miscarriage of justice. And the tragedy of two young boys being ripped off the streets should never have been allowed to happen. And even though that it did, there should have been a prior or much better investigation after this new evidence, especially after this new evidence was reported.
Did the police ever investigate the Martin case, Martin kidnapping?
When Eugene Martin was kidnapped in 1984, they
This was
brought...
6 months after Johnny.
No, it was 2 years.
2 years, okay, start again.
2 years after my son was kidnapped in 1984, Eugene Martin another paper carrier was kidnapped off the streets of Des Moines. At that kidnapping, the FBI they were called in. They brought in 22 agents from Quantico, Virginia, to investigate the case, something they didn't do for Johnny. They did aerial searches, which they wouldn't do for Johnny. They brought in dog teams, which they didn't do for Johnny. All of the things that should have been proper investigation for Johnny and wasn't done, they did do for the Martin boy. I don't understand why there would be such a difference, except that there was a public outcry. The citizens of Iowa raised the roof at 2 kids being kidnapped. When it was just my son, there was not that public outcry, and I don't understand why. A few months before Paul Bonacci was kidnapped, or before Eugene Martin was kidnapped, a man called me by the name of Sam Soda.
Excuse me, go back. Start again, say a few months before Johnny.
A few months before Johnny was kidnapped, a man by the name of Sam Soda, a private investigator locally, called me. He wanted to meet, and he said that he had information that there was going to be a second kidnapping in Des Moines. When I asked him where, how did he know this, he wouldn't reveal his sources, but he told me that it would be the second weekend in August of 1984, that it would be the south side of Des Moines, and it would be another paperboy. And I said, well, why are you telling me? And he said, so I could go to the authorities. When I asked Sam Soda how he knew this information about a second kidnapping, he wouldn't reveal his sources, but he told me that he wanted me to go to the authorities and tell them. I had made a tape recording of that conversation. So I went to the Des Moines Police Department and wanted to play my tape for them, and they laughed at me, and they sort of patted me on the head and sent me out the door. I then went to the TV stations and talked to the managers of each of the TV stations here in Des Moines and told them about it. They at least listened, but they didn't want to hear my tape. I also then talked to Frank Santiago of the Des Moines Register, and I told him about this whole possibility of another kidnapping. At that point, I was to fly to Washington, D.C. to testify before the Senate hearings. I went, testified in Washington, and flew home. The next day, 2020, came to Des Moines to film Johnny's story. This was now August of 1984. Karen Burns, the producer, was in our home. After we did the interviews, I told her about this prediction of a second kidnapping. And I told her about Sam Soda, and I let her listen to the tape recording. And she said, well, what have you done about this? And I told her I went to the police, I went to the press, they all know about it. She says, I think I'll stay the night. So the film crew flew back to New York. Karen stayed in Des Moines. The next morning, my phone rang, and...
Okay, start with the next morning. How did you start? You received that phone call.
The next morning, the next morning, our phone rang early, and it was the TV reporter from Channel 5, which is our ABC station in Des Moines, and he was telling me that, yes, Mrs. Gosch, there's been another kidnapping, just like you said it would happen. And he was just out of breath. He was a real young kid. And I said to him, how do you know it's a kidnapping? He says, I just heard it. Hello? Hi? I'm fine.
Okay.
The next morning, my phone rang, and it was a reporter from Channel 5, our ABC station, and he starts out by saying, Mrs. Gosch, there's been another kidnapping, just like you said was going to happen, just exactly the way you said it would happen. the south side of Des Moines, another paper boy. He said, the FBI's been called in. And I said, how do you know all this? He said, well, it was on the police scanners, and they're treating it as a kidnapping right away. So I thanked him, and that was the end of it. I called Karen Burns at the Marriott Hotel. I woke her up, and I said, Karen, it's just happened. There's been another kidnapping, just as the man told me. Call and get your own film crew back here from New York. Don't use the locals on this one. So Karen called New York. They got a film crew on a plane, and by about 9 o'clock they were into Des Moines. They blasted into the Des Moines police station with a microphone in her hand, and they shoved it in the face of the police chief, and they said, are you going to do aerial searches for this boy? They didn't for Johnny Gosch. Are you calling in the FBI? They didn't for Johnny Gosch. Are you bringing in canine teams? They wouldn't for Johnny Gosch. And they put the police chief on the spot, and this went on national television. Later, they continued to investigate the Martin case, and he was not found either. However, I thought the police would come to me like men and want to discuss the tape I had and want to know who it was that gave me the information. They did not. Instead, they told me that if I ever breathed a word of it to the Martin family, they would put a gag order on me, and they would press charges against me, some kind of charges, to make me wish I had never spoken to the Martin family. Well, it was apparent to me that they did not want the word out that the second kidnapping had been known ahead of time and that it could have been prevented. So what was Sam Soda in this whole concoction, this whole equation? Sam Soda, according to Paul Bonacci, they called him Soda Pop. Sam Soda, according to Paul Bonacci, brought photographs of my son to a motel room the night before the kidnapping and said, this is the kid that we're taking in the morning. Sam Soda, according to Paul Bonacci, was present at the farm outside of Sioux City, and he watched as Paul Bonacci had sex with my son, and the pictures were snapped and taken of it. That he had been involved in the whole thing from the beginning, according to Paul Bonacci's testimony, which he gave in court, and which was ruled on in a federal court ruling as being truth.
Did they ever find the Martin kid?
The Martin boy's never been found.
Did Johnny or anybody else tell you or Paul that the Martin kid was part of the same operation, the same ring?
In many of the discussions that I've had with Paul Bonacci, as well as some other victims, some who do not want their names mentioned, they have all said that Paul Bonacci told the truth, that he, in fact, did know that Eugene Martin was part of the same kidnapping plot, same people, same purpose in mind, as well as other boys throughout the country. One such victim also told me that Jacob Wetterling, a little boy from Minnesota, was also a victim of this same group.
Has Wetterling ever been found?
No, all the boys are still missing. I have been told, however, that Eugene Martin and Jacob Wetterling are both still alive. Hello?
Hang on. A breather?
They didn't do anything. It was just a static thing.
Okay, are you on camera now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Did you tell the police about Soda at all, or did you tell the FBI about Soda? Knowing in advance of this kidnapping?
Yes, I told the police and I told the FBI about Sam Soda. And all they said to me was, he denies ever saying such a thing. And I argued with them, and the police were not willing to do anything about it. It took many years later before I found out why. There used to be a place in Des Moines called Barry's Lounge. And upstairs in Barry's Lounge, they showed films, all kinds of adult variety films, some that were kiddie porn. And a waitress that had worked there called me on the phone after Barry's Lounge burned and told me that Sam Soda was the one that used to bring in a big brown sack wrapped with lots and lots of duct tape, and he would disappear upstairs on the nights that they were showing the films of kiddie porn, and that he in fact was the supplier and delivered the goods on the nights that they had those films.
What goods?
The kiddie porn films.
Oh, the films.
Mm-hmm. And that is how Sam Soda factored into it, and that many of the people that came to see the films were some of Des Moines' finest.
Do you have the names of these Des Moines finest people?
The waitress did not give me the names. She just said that they were Des Moines cops and some Des Moines detectives that attended. So therefore, when I would squawk about Sam Soda's involvement, there is no way that the police would ever approach him, ever do anything to him, because he was part of it. They were part of it.
Did Paul, no, excuse me, go back. Did Johnny mention to you that these kids were also used in satanic ceremonies?
Yes.
Start again. Forget I asked you that question. Just start.
My son also mentioned when he was here that the kids were forced to participate in satanic, and the rituals were more to create and cause the kids to...
Turn it on. Better turn it off.
Again?
Did Johnny ever tell you about the kids being involved in satanic ceremonies?
Okay. When my son visited, he also told me that the kids were involved in satanic ceremonies and rituals in which they did the killing of babies and sacrificing in some very bizarre types of acts. The rituals had a dual purpose. They were also used as a way to traumatize and control the victims as much as the exhilaration, so to speak, of the people that were involved in doing them. They would get a certain hype or momentum going with all of the participants, and they would enter into kind of a different mindset or frenzy in doing these rituals. And he felt that it was a dual purpose of control as well.
Did Johnny say anything about where these babies came from that were being sacrificed?
The only term that I can recall that Johnny talked about, as well as some of the other victims that I spoke with, they used the term breeder mothers as one. And situations where the babies would not be born in a normal situation where there would be a birth certificate in a hospital. The births were done in a home place, or the fetus would be aborted in a type of miscarriage situation before it would have reached full term.
Did Johnny ever talk to you or tell you anything about the other kidnappings where they used these kids that they kidnapped for the satanic ceremonies?
Where they used the kid? Did they use them to lure other kids?
No, and as victims.
No, he didn't talk about
Didn't
that.
say that. Okay.
No.
So the main thing is they kidnap these kids in order to put them into the inner circle, use them for sex objects, and then make sure they were blackmailed and never get out.
As a way to blackmail politicians or get them under their thumb.
Summarize that.
Okay.
What Johnny said.
Okay. From what I was able to learn from my own son and from other victims that I've talked to over the years, is that the kids that were kidnapped and put into the pornography and prostitution end of this horrific crime, they were used to intimidate and to infiltrate a level of our government and officials where they could be controlled and blackmailed for their deeds and acts with children. Therefore, whoever was in control of the children also then had control of that politician. Okay?
Good. That's important. Did you think of anything else? Did we miss anything?
Rusty, did we miss anything?
Rusty wasn't listening.
You weren't listening?
I am and I'm not. I guess there's sort of...
You know, I'm thinking,
it's like a wall
don't
goes
pay
up.
attention to him. He's the cameraman.
Well,
No,
I know
it-
he's a cameraman, but he was in court with us and all
You know,
of that, and I'm just wondering if there's any...
whenever I
little-
get into this stuff, it's just like
He-
a wall goes up.
He closes down.
Oh, I
Yeah.
just wondered if he thought there was any other details.
It's
George,
all part
can you
of
think
the
of any other
epilepsy
details?
bit.
Well, did we miss
He
anything?
told them all about your life. No.
Miss anything in your opinion today?
No.
We covered it all?
I think we've covered it all. We got Sam Soda, the judge's ruling, Johnny's kidnapping, Johnny's visit,
The book, the
book.
the foundation.
John.
and my website is www.johnnygosch.com.
Yeah, there. Now I can see it.
On this website, you'll find information about Johnny's story, the kidnapping of other children, and you'll find a 52-page report based on the investigation by Ted Gunderson on my son's case and the related Franklin Credit Union cover-up.
What's the name of the website again?
The name of my website is www.johnnygosch.com, and the title of my book is Why Johnny Can't Come Home. This will give you the full story of why children are being kidnapped in America.
We can put some headings on that.
Yeah, well,
And then, you know those little square things I have in there?
Yeah.
I'll give you some of those to use because they're real clear, they're easy to shoot.
Yeah.
And then those other pictures that you want, I'll get those gathered up. And
We need to get a good still of Johnny right there.
the Reader's Digest. No.
Yeah, and the Reader's Digest.
TV Guide, Reader's Digest.
It might take me a day or
Time
two to
Life,
dig that out because when I
National
got
Enquirer.
finished...
No.
Yeah.
No, listen, don't send the originals. Make
No,
copies.
I'll make copies.
Make good copies.
Make good copies.
I've got a real good copy machine. I'll make color copies.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, if nothing
Yeah.
else, bring them to Kinko's and get really good copies.
Okay. All right. I'll make a copy of the cover, and then I'll open it up to the page where it shows Conspiracy of Silence, and I'll get a good shot of that.
Now, let me ask you another question. Do you have any information as to why Conspiracy of Silence was never aired?
The only information I was told, and that
Sorry, start again.
Oh, this is for the camera. I thought it was the
No,
conversation.
for camera.
In May of 1994, a film called Conspiracy of Silence was supposed to be aired. It had appeared in the TV Guide, and it was supposed to air this on a certain evening. It was related to me by John DeCamp that the network, the Discovery Channel, received a phone call and they were told to pull it off the air. Yorkshire TV, who filmed this broadcast, also were told that the film was not going to be able to be aired and they were ordered to destroy all copies. I was also told that Discovery Channel was at that point purchased by the Bush family. I don't know that to be true, but that is the report that I was given by John DeCamp.
We'll get John DeCamp on that one.
Because he's the one that told me that the
Yeah.
Bush family bought it. And then that night, I mean, just hours before it was supposed to go on, it was jerked off the air, and then they were told to destroy the
I
copy.
mentioned that they were paid for the film, $400,000 for their efforts in film, so
Yeah.
Yeah, what they were paid for it.
Yorkshire was paid for the rights to their work involved in the film. It was never aired.
Oh, okay. Yorkshire TV, as far as I know, were paid $400,000 for their work and contribution in filming, for all the expenses in filming this Conspiracy of Silence. Who paid it, I don't know.
Maybe John has some information on it. We're going to interview John.
Yeah, I do not know who paid that amount.
Anything else we haven't covered you can think of?
You talked about the second kidnapping here
Yes.
involving that.
The Martin kid?
Yeah.
Yeah. Have there been any other
Talk about the death threats I got.
Any other kidnappings since then?
Not in Des Moines or Iowa.
Oh, I know a question I wanted to ask. In fact, I got it on my notes. Are we on camera now? What's the reaction of the Des Moines Register? In other words, did the Des Moines Register say anything or help you out in regard to the fact that the FBI and the police refused to investigate this? Did they come to your rescue? Did they give you adequate publicity? Did they support you?
In the very beginning, when Johnny was kidnapped, there was a lot of publicity about Johnny's case, and they reported it fairly accurately. Then about a week or so...
Excuse me. The Des Moines Register reported it. Start again.
Okay.
Instead of saying they reported it, because
Okay.
I'm not going to be on there.
Right. The Des Moines Register, in the beginning, gave us adequate coverage after Johnny was kidnapped. Pictures of Johnny and a fairly good story about it. Within a few days, however, the story began to change, and it began to be slanted against the family. I received a phone call from a woman who worked in the newsroom. She would not identify herself, but she said, "You need to know this." The editor came into the newsroom and instructed every one of the writers who would handle the Johnny Gosch story to slant all stories against the family. And those were the orders that we were given. She said, "I'm a mother, and I can't imagine what you're going through. I'll lose my job if I give you my name, but you need to know what you're up against in this town." The Des Moines Register did start some kind of a reward fund. They collected thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. Not one penny of it was ever given to either family of the Martins or me, but instead someone decided at a much later date to give the money to a runaway shelter. So none of the money was used ever for Johnny or Eugene.
Okay. Runaway shelter. Means it went in the politicians or somebody's pocket.
Do you know which runaway shelter?
Yes, Ames, Iowa.
Ames, Iowa. What Ames, Iowa runaway shelter?
George Belitza ran it.
Do you have any other thoughts, George?
Do you know him? George Belitza? He ran it at that time. I don't know if
I think we've covered everything, don't you?
I think so too.
I mean, normally an interview with you would go 2 or 3 days, but but no, seriously, you can't get into an interview for video in all that detail.
A lot of times when the big crews come in, it is 2 or 3 days.
Oh, no.
Because they do action stuff, you know. They want you to,
Yeah.
like one wanted me to
I
show what
mean,
else I did in my life, so they wanted me on the floor doing yoga.
Yeah. No, but I'm talking about real in-depth debriefing would take a long time.
Oh,
We missed
But
that.
that's because there's so much, but for the purposes of the...
For what you wanted,
Yeah,
to clip and snip a little bit out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's basically filler and highlight.
Yeah.
And you're going to want to hit the same points that John DeCamp and Paul Van
Yeah.
Helsing bring out so that it relates to how
Yeah.
Weave it
Yeah.
right
it
in.
ends with Des
Touch on
Moines.
the fact that 2020 spent years and hundreds of thousands of dollars working on this.
And then
deal.
canceled the show.
Yeah, to do that, that's another point.
Yeah.
Good, thanks, George.
What would I do without you?
I have no idea.
Probably not be married.
No, that's good, that's
He's
very
free,
good.
wouldn't he?
So,
Explain
the Des Moines
Better
Register,
just cheap and
the Des
easy,
Moines
right?
Register goes, the FBI won't investigate it, police won't investigate it.
In 1997, I was approached by Karen Burns with ABC once again. They had done Johnny's story 4 or 5 times throughout all of the years. This time she wanted to do a special, a 1-hour special called The Johnny Gosch Story, The Final Curtain, meaning the final conclusion of what happened. They spent 2 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars filming victims, filming everyone across the country that was remotely connected with this. And then we were told that it would not air. And they postponed and postponed and postponed until finally they told me that it would not air at all. In a later conversation with another producer at ABC, I learned that 2020 has spread the word throughout the ABC building that they own the Johnny Gosch story, and they are not going to show it or sell it to anyone else, that they will be the ones that will interview Johnny Gosch himself when he decides to come forward, and they will have the total exclusive in the country. And that is why it is on a shelf in ABC today and has not been aired.
Do you think there's more than that to it?
I believe, however, that there's much more to this. I believe that the producer, Karen Burns, has probably been threatened and or others in the organization bought off. Disney has bought ABC, and it is a big player in the whole Franklin Credit Union
Excuse me, let
situation.
me correct you. I heard that Disney bought 2020. They don't own ABC. ABC's a corporation.
Oh, they just bought 2020
That's what I heard.
Disney and Warren Buffett owns 21%.
Yeah.
of the whole ABC.
Because it's the corporation.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, so let's start again on that.
Okay.
Disney's.
Okay. Disney has purchased 2020, and from the investigation that has ensued with many mind control and sexual abuse victims, many of the kids were traumatized at the Disney World locations. This came about at the same time that my story was killed and being held hostage at ABC. One has to wonder if this is related and connected, since it's all about abusing and sexually abusing and mentally abusing and physically abusing children.
At the highest level.
At the highest level in our country. That's going to work?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We can slice it in enough to where...
Well, I know you're going to be dissecting it a lot.
They spent an hour editing.
Oh, I know. That's a big job to edit.
Biology class revisited.
It makes me...
I haven't interviewed him yet.
I know.
I'm going to interview him.
I knew somebody should have just had a TV camera.
Do you want to turn
and
that off now?
Oh, he likes to get all this candid stuff.
That's right.
No.
That was when you were in the Senate investigating.
My very first investigator, Denny Whalen, went
Okay,
to one
good.
of the auctions.
Cover that.
Early in the Johnny's investigation, shortly after I had hired Denny Whalen, who was a private investigator, he came to me and he said that he had learned that there were auctions of children that were taking place throughout the country, and that he had someone that could get him into the auction as a buyer, but he would need the financial backing that if Johnny came across the auction block that night, that he could buy him back for us, and the only thing we would be able to say to the authorities would be that we paid a private ransom. So we arranged for financing by taking a second mortgage on our house so that we had the cash available. He went to the auction. That particular one was held near Houston, Texas. Johnny did not go across the auction block that night, but Denny Whalen described to us when he got back that there had been 26 boys all marched across a stage-like area, all wearing nothing but their underwear, and they had a number hung around their neck on a string, and that each child was brought up and auctioned and then taken away. There were foreign buyers there from other countries and left that night with an American child.
And did anybody else tell you about auctions anyplace else?
No, only
Did Johnny mention auctions when he came home that
he
time?
didn't talk about the auction.
Oh, at the investigating hearing you were at, when you seen the catalogs.
Say that again.
The Senate investigating hearings you were at, where they had everything spread on the table.
Oh, yeah, with the FBI, and the FBI covered it up. Okay, good.
In August of 1984, when I testified before the organized crime hearings in Washington, D.C., I presented information about Johnny's kidnapping and the auctions that took place. Kenneth Lanning with the FBI also presented that day, and he also displayed on a conference table about 6 foot long all the paraphernalia that was seized during the arrest of a pedophile. One of the items that was seized was a catalog filled with pictures of children that had not yet been kidnapped. I asked for a copy of it, and I was told that I could not have that. The Washington Press Corps was there in full force. They filmed all of us. They filmed the table with the paraphernalia, and they filmed the picture of the catalog. It was reported in the Washington Press the next day. In subsequent interviews, Kenneth Lanning now has denied that that catalog ever existed, and he denied saying that he ever testified to that fact, and he has in fact called me a liar.
Don't feel bad. He's said some nasty things about me, too. George, you got any other?
Yeah, but who hasn't?
Rusty. They're traveling with a
See,
little...
listen to see what George said.
I don't know for sure what you've done.
Guess what they have out in the car? A black cat.
I brought my own pussy cat.
Well, we covered just, I think, just about everything we talked about at lunch. Didn't we? Yeah, I think we did.
Those were good that you brought up, though, because we had missed them.
Yeah.
Yeah. You need another
Have you
job.
mentioned anything? I know you probably said something about the book, but have you mentioned that there's probably been 60 or 100 more victims that have read your book come forward by email?
Yeah. People that have contacted me.
Come forward by email if they're verifying what you're saying in there, and that are still looking for help and know where to go.
Okay, go. That's good. Go ahead.
Since the time that my book has come out, which was just a year ago, the amount of victims that have contacted me through emails or letters or phone calls, victims of this same sexual abuse and the mind control, wanting help, not knowing where to turn, the memories of what they have experienced are coming back to them. They feel isolated and afraid and want to know where they should go, what they should do to try and bring their lives back together. Many of them are about the same age as my son is today. Some are older. This crime has existed for many, many decades. It is nothing new. They have been so sophisticated in the way that they have orchestrated this type of crime, and to the level that they have in this country, that the average citizen finds it not only difficult but impossible to believe that it could ever happen.
Any other thoughts? Points? How many of these victims?
We've had about 66 or 68 contact us since the book came out.
Are these what you call survivors?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Some, a lot.
You have their names?
Some of them I do still have their names. Some of them didn't ever let the names go publicly. Some of the names I gave to Ellen and Sue just as a point for somebody to contact to or contact with. And both Ellen and Sue told me that they had such a full plate in their life they didn't want to talk to them.
Yeah,
So,
what we really need to do with those names is
gather them up.
gather them up and let them network with each other and then help each other on their own research. That's what I do when
Yeah.
they call me.
Yeah.
I receive a lot of calls like that too.
We're trying to get maybe some type of a chat area or chat room on the website
Mm-hmm.
that would be for victims to go into.
Yeah.
The problem with that is you get all kinds of people who get into it,
Yeah, true.
Weirdos.
and it's got to be monitored somehow.
Well, when they call me, I just put them in direct touch with each other by phone or by email, whatever they have.
Yeah.
And I have a drawer that is nothing but survivors. So if you can get those to me, I'd like to have them.
Okay. Most of what I've received, the major portion of them were emails.
Yeah, that's all right. Any way that at least I'll have a.
In fact, there's one gal that's right outside of Seattle that writes to me quite often. She's had a horrible life. Terrible
Yeah.
life.
Well, I just have them all in one place. I don't know if I'll ever use them or not, or be able to help them, but eventually, maybe we will.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah.
Anything else, George? You can think of? Rusty, anything you can think of? I was just kidding about you not listening.
Think. Wish me luck.
Paul told me about it. They were auctioning kids off in Toronto, Canada, and also Las Vegas.
I had heard about Toronto and Las Vegas through Paul, but I didn't know about the place out there.
And also, I've got the name of an investigator who attended. What's that?
I was in one of them at Las Vegas.
What were you brought there for?
I was brought in with Larry. I didn't know what the hell they were doing.
Mhm.
Larry flew into this one. And as far as I can tell from going back, it's up by Area 51.
It was where?
It's up by Area 51.
Oh, by Roswell.
Yeah, no. Roswell's in New Mexico.
New Mexico.
This is
Okay.
up, was it north of Las Vegas?
Yeah, I read
Indian
it.
Springs and...
Indian Springs, I think it is. I
Were you
read
just
it.
absolutely shocked when you got in
I was shocked, but I didn't dare say anything.
Oh, no.
You know,
How
they
many
were
kids
still,
did they auction that night?
what was there, about a dozen or so? It wasn't that
No, look at
many.
me, I wasn't
They don't
there.
have great big huge ones, about 20 kids at the most at a
Paul
time.
told me he's been to 6 auctions, and the number varied from 6 to 36.
Mm-hmm.
And they were Toronto and Las Vegas. And then I have an investigator on another case who's been to Lincoln at the barn. And I had a tip on an auction at the barn one night, and I called John. He started going up and down the road. And I was told later by a source that the deputy sheriff's radio dispatcher is into the satanic movement. And then when the call went out, check on this barn, they dispersed the auction.
Mm-hmm.
There's supposed to be a huge compound off of 80 West, just west of Lincoln.
Yeah.
With surveillance cameras looking so they can see who's coming, armed guards into the garden gates and
Yeah.
some satanic type deal. But the lady in Connecticut was telling us about.
That's what
How far out east of Lincoln, or west of
No,
Lincoln?
It's the ways.
well, she said it's just west of Lincoln before, and then once you get west of Lincoln, you got, what's that, Grand Black, you got nothing between there.
Yeah.
But it's got to be a hilly
Didn't she
area.
mention Norfolk? Or North?
North Platte.
North.
Platte.
No, not North Platte. There's another town.
I've had survivors send me maps. You know, I'm a one-man army. I can't do
It's
anything.
huge, and it's the,
Yeah.
there's a big one in Pennsylvania, and
Mhm.
I've got the one in Pennsylvania. I've got a map of all that.
this one's in Nebraska, and it's off I-80.
Yeah.
And there's even, somebody was telling us that the first rest area or something after Lincoln is the gathering point where they pick them up, take them, and then get from that rest area to the compound. They just drop them off on the interstate.
Mm.
Was the first one after, one of the rest areas right after
Yeah.
Lincoln was Sandy was telling us that. Gary found that out.
You're right, it did come from
Yeah.
Sandy.
She said that one of the rest areas there was a dropping point for...
It's big.
for,
Yeah, you need to talk to Sandy.
Yeah. I think it was Sandy.
Let me get through this first. And my 3 books.
Well, I meant if you want some of her stuff for this case. too.
Well,
Might
this is Sandy Newton.
Kara Dory.
Oh, I'm going to talk to Sandy. Yeah. We'll talk to her in January. Definitely going to talk to her.
At
Well,
this,
let's get out of these people's lives.
at this,
Hmm?
at this auction that you went to, did the kids, who were some of the buyers? Just,
There was a Jewish guy, I think 3 or 4 Middle Easterners, and a couple American business people.
Was this in Lincoln?
Las Vegas.
No.
when they
Believe that
bought
was-
the kids, what were some of the prices they went for? Do you remember?
15 to 50,000 plus.
Were they all boys, or were they boys and girls, or?
It was mainly boys, but there were a couple girls in it that were, you know, a little bit older.
Were the kids all drugged into submission by that point?
From what I can tell you.
I mean, kind of a daze, so they didn't act out or try to get away or get bizarre.
Yeah.
He talked about it, you know.
Mhm. A lot.
Everybody's talked about Aquino.
And the fact that his ex-wife or somebody's been, what's her name, Linda Blood's been calling and trying to...
We didn't talk about the fact that Linda's been calling me, or did call me asking me if I was sick yet. I don't know if you want to include that or not.
Sure.
Go ahead.
You sit over there.
Go ahead. She's a troublemaker, but, you know.
Oh, she is. Prior to my book being finished, and then shortly after it came out, I started receiving phone calls from Linda Blood, who was reportedly a former girlfriend of Michael Aquino's. And the opening of each conversation was the same. She would always ask me how I was, and I'd say fine, and she would say, "Are you sure you're not sick yet?" And I would always say that I was fine, which I was. It used to concern me a great deal as to why she would ask me that question, except that I know that some of the people involved have ways to try and make someone else ill through a chemical or something like that introduced into their life. So I was sure that she was probably reporting any and all things that I said back to Michael Aquino. I have no way of proving that, But eventually the phone calls did stop, but I did receive quite a few for a period of time.
You have thoughts, George? Rusty, anything more?
I was just wondering when George was going to start hosting his own TV show.
As the world turns with Noreen Gosch.
As the world turned upside down from Noreen Gosch.
You don't have one of these, why Johnny can't come home, do you, from Lincoln?
I don't.
Let's
No.
steal one of these from you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I got mine at home.
I think mine's out in Oregon.
I got, well, you sent me an autographed copy. Thank you.
I knew there was something we had to remember. Noreen Gosch book signing.
Mm-hmm.
Did you mention anything in this meeting that would be relevant, or would be relevant to the Franklin cover-up case about when you went to Governor Vilsack, who has hired Carrie's sister as our Department of Human Services, how he said it's a matter of public safety, not a matter for
Yeah,
criminal investigation?
we went through that.
And by the way, folks, for an extra $50, I'm sure she'll autograph your copy too. It went up to 75. That's only if they get the video with it and you want
That's right. If you need a copy for anybody else, go ahead and take one out of the box.
The video or the book?
The
book.
The book.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
copy that.
I'm gonna autograph one to my son and his wife, will you? Greg and Sue.
To Greg and Sue?
Yeah. If you don't mind, I appreciate it.
We gotta keep it.
Because he's the, I have 4 children, and he's the one kid that really knows what's going on. The others are in denial. To Greg and Sue.
Where do they live?
In Pennsylvania, New Jersey, South Jersey.
As you can see how Noreen Gosch spends her evenings nowadays. Now that she's a newlywed, she signs books. I guess that's what married life does to a person.
Good, thanks.
You're welcome.
Here's your notebook back.
George, who would you like
some notes you can
yours
tear 'em
signed
out.
too?
Did Pam get one?
I don't know if she has.
Why don't you grab one for her? Because she might like to see a picture
Yeah,
of you
I
in
think
it.
so.
Huh?
Yeah, let's put the date on
She'll
it.
probably
You got
have
it in
it
there?
framed.
Put the date on it.
Rusty,
Wouldn't be the
could
first time you're friends.
I use your pen again? I want to put
Of
the
course.
date on here. Do you want the date
Put,
on here?
Christmas, put December, I'll send it as Christmas present, December 25. That's right. Even though you're not with them on that date, it'll be in the form of a Christmas present. Thank you.
Now, do you want today's date?
Yeah, might as well.
It's just 28th.
29.
29th.
Yeah.
Did they ask you the question, what keeps you going, or why do you keep pushing forward? What's your objective?
That's a good
What are you
question.
trying to- Which could be asked of yourself,
That's a good question.
asked of Ted, asked of John DeCamp, asked
Yeah.
of all of you.
You know
Yeah.
what, that you could
Why
ask
are
each
you
one of
doing
us
this?
that
Why
same
not?
question, whether you use it or not,
That's
but
a very good question. Let's get her on camera.
Why are you sacrificing
Yeah.
your
Your
personal
life.
life?
Actually, let me pull up
They
the
can ask the question, somebody could ask you, I don't know, when you're asking questions, is it on the tape?
No.
Oh,
not yet.
No, I'm not,
not personal, I mean, your voice, as if you're the one interviewing her.
no. I'm staying off the tape.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, right.
You ready?
I'm
Spoken like a true narcissist.
But I just want everybody to tell their story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that'd be a good question.
Okay.
to ask
Yeah, it's
John.
very good.
Many people ask me how I can keep going on after losing my son the way that I did. Why do you keep going on? First of all, I'll answer the why. I keep going on because I love my son. And I feel very badly for what has happened to him and so many thousands of other children. If somebody doesn't rise up and say something and do something, it will continue to grow greater than it is already. If parents don't band together, those of us who've lost our children, and let the others know, then there'll be more victims. The old saying, the buck has to stop somewhere, or the buck stops here, is what I believe. They took the wrong kid when they took Johnny Gosch. How I keep going each day, I do it day by day. There are days that I go hour by hour. Some days are good days. But none of my days could ever be as bad as the days that my son has spent since he was ripped away from his home. And when I start to feel badly, when it starts to really tear at me, that's what I think about. That he is the true victim here, not me. I've had a terrible heartache, but I'm not the victim in this situation. It was a little 12-year-old boy that didn't do anything to anyone. And as long as I kind of jerk myself back by the collar, then I can straighten up and fly and make it to the next day and the next. And I thank God every day for my strength, mental and physical. And I'm very thankful for what I do have in my life, the people I have in my life that support me and love me and care.
Very good.
Yeah. Here's the one for Pam.
Well, I take glass out of it, though.
Noreen, do you have my summary? I wrote a summary up on the Franklin case.
Huh?
Years ago, I wrote a summary, came in, closed them down.
Well, here's what happened. Wasn't Spotlight connected with the guy in
More
Warren?
copies or what's up?
The gal in the office there told me that John Zelensky's been calling there a lot.
And Zelensky is.
And so I figured, well, if whoever he calls a lot, he goes into the whole story about. Over the past 20 years, I've seen a lot of different reactions to Johnny's kidnapping and the information surrounding missing children. Everything from disbelief to non-acceptance to the people who are the majority, which are the ones that are praying for you and wishing you well and cheering you on, because they know that what you're doing is trying to make a better system and a better, safer situation for their children. With the, what was the second point? I forgot the second.
The avenues you've been taking most recently.
Okay. The most recent avenues I've been taking to get the word out is talk shows, radio talk shows, network television whenever that becomes available, and then speeches when they are also requested in different communities. I give speeches and have for schools, civic organizations, churches, anyone who is interested in knowing about missing children and making their own children safer. I also have taken to the internet. I have a website which is www.johnnygosch.com, and on there's a way to connect to me through email. I answer all emails that come in, and I also am going to continue with as much publicity as I can generate for the whole missing children's issue, because I think that it's one that is easily forgotten, not thought of as much as it should be, because it is such a horrific crime. It makes people very afraid for their own children, and the word needs to be kept out there, and we need to keep moving.
Maybe a little bit of how it appears that the American public is tuning away from the news made for television to talking, directly talking to people over talk radio,
Okay.
where you're actually in person and talking to people over the phones, and there seems to be more of a conscious awareness of what's really going on.
Right.
Chat rooms, the internet, how much
There seems to be a different turn with people and the news. The made-for-television news is not as appealing as much anymore because of the hype, and people are turning to alternative news media sources, both on the internet and Talk Free America Radio, the programs that are not censored, where you get the real truth about what is happening in our country and in our world.
Question I have. From your lecture speeches, the book, and so forth, how many other parents of kidnapped victims have been in contact with you?
Over the long 20 years that Johnny's been missing, I have been contacted by hundreds of parents that have had missing and sexually abused children. In some cases, the children are dead, they've been murdered, and the bottom line is, the result is, neither one of us, none of us, have our children. And the things that they want from me range from how to run an investigation when the police don't help you, how do you continue to survive the terrible tragedy, keep your job, and keep the other members of your family flying straight. I am considering writing another book on coping techniques, because there are ways to cope that are hands-on techniques that give you something tangible. And that's what people need, because when everything else in your world is turned upside down and you lose control of your world, that is when people become very frenzied, when others have complete control. And you can take some of that back in little ways, even though the kidnapper, the police, the press, may be the large players in your life. You can do little things to have that feeling of control and some measure of balance again.
And of the parents who have contacted you, parents of the victims, have they had the same experience with law enforcement that you have? In other words, have some of them, all of them, a majority of them? What percentage?
The majority of the parents that have contacted me some have had difficulty with the police and law enforcement in the very beginning of their cases. Some have had cooperation in the beginning, and then it has turned sour, where the law enforcement either got tired of running leads or put the cases on the back burner and do not work them. And the parents then have nowhere to go. They don't know what to do. And a lot of people are not equipped financially to hire a private investigator. It's very costly. And so in that case, I give the parents ideas on how to do fundraisers to raise the money to get a good detective on the case. Because the key is you have to have somebody looking, somebody working the case.
Have they had the same experience, or what percentage have had the same experience as you with the FBI?
At this point in time, I have yet to have one set of parents tell me that the experience with the FBI has been a good one. The FBI has taken a very lax attitude towards missing children. It was not as important as it should have been. And evidence of that was when the racehorse, the prize-winning racehorse, Fran Ferluke, was missing. Someone had stolen it. And they gave attention to that and refused to work on Adam Walsh's case. And John Walsh cited that when we were at the Justice Department and testified, and he cited